I go by the alias of John Killingsworth. I was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, and I'm 25 years old. And this is my story. My story begins in 1975 when my father escaped from the Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia that killed over 1.5 million people. Now, I remember this story because my father told me that story when I was 14 to 15 years old. We were just going back from a long car trip, and I'll never forget that moment when he told me that he was boarding on the plane. Just before he was boarding on the plane, he waved at his whole family that saved up so much money throughout all these weeks, these months, just for him to escape because he was the only hope left for our family. And when he flew off, he didn't know what to expect. He arrived to Canada around 1975. At 20 years old, he had no clue how to speak English or French. He had no clue what he was going to do, but he had to start his whole life over with no friends, no family, nobody, completely alone, and that's what he did. He studied full-time while working at a job full-time at the same time, just so he could make it through. It's only several years later that he went back, and fortunately everyone was dead. Half of his family was dead, and also his father, who is my grandfather, he never heard of him again. And he went back to the Khmer Rouge Genocide Museum to see, because in that museum there are portraits of all of the people who, or most of the people who were executed, high class people that were executed at the time. They had pictures of them on the wall, and my father tried to look for his father because that's where all the people were, but he could not find him. After that, during that time, my mother from 1975 to 1979 had to endure 4 years of hardship in the concentration camps. And my mother, she saw the worst of things. She saw torture, she saw death, she saw genocide. And I never asked her what she saw because that would bring so many negative memories back to mind. So my mother, she's a warrior. She fought these four long years in Cambodia. Only afterwards was she able to escape Cambodia and go to Canada with her mother, which is my grandmother. And this is when she met my father eventually. And my mother, she studied accounting because she didn't know what else to do with her life. So that's what she decided to do. And after that, she met my father. And I never knew it. I never knew these things until I was 14 to 15 years old. They never really told me the whole story because they didn't want to tell me too much about it because it was very dark. And it's only a few years ago that I've heard about my father having a long history of depression. My father had suicidal tendencies at a certain point, and my grandfather was severely depressed. And what's interesting about my grandfather is that he was extremely authoritative, extremely prone to anger, and my father is also prone to anger. And my mother, she took anxiety pills while in university to cope with that feeling of anxiety that she felt. Now, my story is a bit different from my parents, and that's probably why I have a hard time relating with them, or they have a hard time relating with me. Because my childhood was not that bad, actually. I was spoiled growing up. My parents, they always told me that, they encouraged me, they were nice to me, but I was very shy, extremely shy. I had a few friends, but I never felt like I had that big group of friends. I never felt like I was popular by any means. And anyway, that wasn't my goal, but I never felt like I was, the cool kid. I was so very shy. And that was my life. And until I hit my teenage years or early adult years where I started to feel the loneliness creep in. I felt like there was this void in me, like this loneliness that I wanted a romantic partner, or I wanted to find love or find that fulfillment somewhere from a romantic encounter, which is when I discovered the pickup artist group, the pickup artist community. And this is when I got carried into personal development for the first time. And those were some of the most difficult times of my life, where I'd have to go out trying to meet new people and confront my fear, because I was extremely shy, extremely reserved, extremely afraid to put myself out there and be vulnerable, and I get rejected left and right. It was extremely difficult, and I still remember some of the worst nights of my life where I almost got into fights and crying myself to sleep because it was just so hard and so lonely. I had a few times, this is around that time when I met some of my friends in college, which is great. So I had these friends in my life, at least, to support me. When I was younger, I always wanted to be into film school. I was a teenager, 14, 15, 16 years old, and I wanted to become a filmmaker. So I applied to film school and I got rejected. I was incredibly sad. I thought, how could I get rejected into the film production program? That would make no sense because, you know, in high school, everyone told me I was amazing at films and all that, but I got rejected. So I applied the next year and I got rejected again. And I was so sad and I was so pissed off there that I didn't know what else to do. So I looked around me, I looked at what could I do? Maybe I could just do films on the side. Maybe I could be artistic on the side. Maybe I could just do my own project. And this is when I came up with Nameless. Nameless was my creation. Nameless was my own idea. And just started as a small, faint idea. And you know, at the beginning, I didn't think about doing public speaking because when I was 17 years old, my father told me that I could never become a public speaker. Why? Because I didn't have the credentials, or I didn't want to get the credentials. I didn't want to get into psychology. I'd have to get a PhD before I could even think of even speaking on stage. That's what he told me. That was a long time around my teenage years. I had this dream of maybe I could become a public speaker, but I never really actualized that dream then because I didn't believe it was possible. But I just continued. And I continued, even though I got rejected into the film production program. Yes, I was still going to school, and while I was still at school, I grinded in my parents' basement. I started pumping videos on Nameless 3 times a week. I just grinded out. I tried to post videos and publish videos and shoot videos. It was incredibly difficult, but I did it. And I just kept working on myself every single day, every single week, until I arrived at this point in my life. So this is just the beginning of Nameless. Father, I'm sorry if I might have been rude to you in the past, or if I've held grudges towards you in the past for certain things that you told me, certain discouragements that you told me I could never become a public speaker, that you screamed at me telling me I could never move out of the house because I'll never make it. I want to say that I'm sorry, because I knew that deep down you were only hurt. You were only afraid, just like me. And I want to thank you, because I wouldn't be here without you. That empty feeling that we all feel inside of us from time to time is part of the human condition. Because us humans, we're always striving towards finding a purpose in our lives or finding something meaningful in order for us to do. So it makes sense why we feel unfulfilled when we don't have that. And if you don't find